So I'm going to just get us started. We're all friends. You're all familiar with the Community Design Center, and you all know who I am, and hopefully you know Suzanne. But we'll have a few introductory slides to acknowledge our sponsors, and then I hope that we can all turn on our screens and have a wonderful conversation regarding June Grant's presentation last week. And so first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, Home Leasing, who has been our sponsor for the lecture series for the past 5 years. We truly appreciate their commitment to the lecture series as well as the support to the Community Design Center. We'd like to give special thanks to ESL Charitable Foundation for being a gold sponsor for the series, as well as the Community Preservation Corporation. And I'd like to acknowledge all of our event sponsors for the series, the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, Reconnect Rochester, City of Rochester, and Hebron and Company. Thanks to all of you for your support. And our media sponsor is WXXI, and we are greatly appreciate AIA Rochester being our CES sponsor. And the series and the work that we do at the Community Design Center would not be possible without the amazing support from our local businesses and firms. So we are grateful to each and every one of you for your support. I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge the people behind the scenes that make the series possible, in particular, the Reshaping Rochester Lecture Committee that works year-round in planning the series. We are actively engaged in starting to plan next year's series. I'd like to thank the Board of Directors for their guidance and support. And I'd especially like to thank the staff, in particular, Monica Reifenstein, for being the wizard behind the scenes today. And I'd like to thank our Circle of Friends. Circle of Friends are persons who have made a sustained commitment to the organization. We truly appreciate the commitment that you've made and helps us in planning our programming. If you are someone who appreciates the work that the Community Design Center does, we invite you to become part of our Circle of Friends family. And I'd like to acknowledge the New York State Council on the Arts that has supported the Community Design Center for nearly 20 years. And now I'd like to introduce Susan Mayer. She is a city resident and the co-founder and president of Hinge Neighbors. Suzanne, first of all, I'm gonna invite everyone to turn on their screens and join the conversation. But Suzanne, I'd love for you to take some time to share with us a little bit about your interests, your engagement in the city, and in particular, why you formed Hinge Neighbors and what Hinge Neighbors is meant to accomplish.
Thank you. I'm excited. I love that picture that you did. Somebody had put in there. That's very nice. It was the best picture I ever had taken of me. So I always say, oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. Well, I guess that maybe I'll ask you to participate with me, Maria, and more talking as a conversation and how we did get involved and why we're involved. So I would like to be interrupted. So I think that we have a small enough group to be interrupted today. Maybe my background as I had a business called Serious Change. I found early in my career that I enjoyed being a disruptor. My whole thing is I ask why, and why is not a very comfortable question for most people. People really avoid you when you say, why is that? Instead of saying it's like a judgmental as opposed to, I'm really curious about what's going on and tell me about this. So I've had to learn how why is really not a very good question for some people and how do you change that? So in my career, I was found, I had a particular man, a boss, who is a really good friend of mine now, who recognized the fact that I needed constant change in my life. And that the way he could actually use me best in this corporate world was to assign me a different challenge every 18 months. Normally people quit their jobs and move around every 18 months, or my personality type probably. And so he awarded that. He found that he listened and he realized how he could use me. And I think I've never gone back. And that's why I started my company, which is called Serious Change. I'd like to just talk a little bit first before we get into how we did Hinge, is that there are what I call Beatitudes of change. And the Beatitudes of change that we need to really think about whenever we start on any project. And I think that June Grant was really talking a little bit about this, is that change is not easy for people. I mean, look at the last 4 years, we're all of the last president was all focused on going back, going to the status quo, avoiding change, continually, it's a retro thing. And when you're involved in change, you're pushing people out of their comfort zone. So that's what Hinge Neighbors sort of was designed to do. Like Sean and I decided that we needed to do that. So the Beatitudes of change, for those of you wondering what those pearls of wisdom are, is that you have to be positive, you have to be focused, and on top of that, you have to be flexible. So you start, and usually somebody says no to you. It's like, oh, okay, I got to be flexible about this. How else do I move around? And then I have to be organized, and you have to be proactive. So, and you have to constantly think and engage. And the most part, on most of my career, I had to really learn to listen. And if you know me, that's really huge. June talks about it. I have to learn how to listen. So with that, Sean and I first started out, I was thinking about politics, and I realized that somebody asked me, why don't you run for a city council? And I decided that I was too old and probably not the type that would be really great as a city council person. And I would really like to find somebody to support. So I heard that Sean was running, and I approached him and I said, would you like some help? And that's how our friendship started. And that's how we've continued to work together. We found we really worked well together. We had a lot of tea together. His brother and I walked many a mile in that campaign, solving all the problems of the world and losing, each of us, I think that we lost 50 pounds between the two of us. So after that, we said, well, okay, we didn't win this election, but we became a team, and we understood, we thought alike, and we had possibilities of working together. And Sean said, you know, this interloop is going to come. And we looked at each other and said, you know, no one's going to listen to the residents. And here in the East Side, we experienced some guerrilla warfare and guerrilla meetings about how things should change. And we said, we have to make that more of a public thing, that it doesn't have to be guerrilla. And let's talk to the city about how we could make this the residents involved. And that's really the whole thing about Hinge Neighbors, was we have to make sure that the residents' voice is heard. And in this case, in most cases, it's like you're dealing with a lot of apathy, and the apathy is not, I don't care. The apathy is, quote, everywhere you go on both sides of the moat. Well, the city has never listened to us before. They come in and do their process at HUD time or at election time, and they ask us, what do we need? They go about wanting us to develop strategic plans, and then they exit. We don't hear from them again. We look at what the plans are. There's nothing in there that we asked for or continue, and so why bother? And that's a continue, and they've been trained then to not care, or people think they don't care. So this is, when we started this work, we found that's the issue. We just really have to talk, and change is the process of change, or the stages of change, are very much like the stages of death. And those of you who are social animals, first it's denial, then it's anger, then it's like bargaining, I've done all of these myself. I don't know about you guys, but oh God, that's never going to happen. Oh, and then, oh, well, if I do this, maybe it'll happen. And then you get to the point where, oh God, I'm depressed. This is really going to happen to me. And then you sort of accept it. So you finally accept it, and then you can get on with it. And then you can do the positive, focused, flexible, organized, and proactive. So that's what we started to do. And the roles and also knowing that Sean is an artist, he really believed in how are we going to have art is important because art brings people out. You can have discussions. It's non-threatening. People like it or hate it, but he's used to going out there. Any artist, whether it's a poet or anybody who is doing that kind of creative work, knows that they're subject to constant criticism. So they get used to it. And if you're in the business of change, you also realize that you're not really well liked, and you have to have thick skin. And that's why I look this way. And you have to really be able to take it, listen, and then, okay, I hear what you're saying now. And sometimes you have to say, you're right. And I have to think about that further and move around it. And you have to be a little bit like a sheepdog. And a sheepdog learns very quickly that you can't go directly and right into a flock of sheep and push it around. You have to sometimes go to the back, to the side, sometimes just sit there and watch, let them do what they're doing, and then move around when you see that there's an opportunity to do something on the side. So if you watch a sheepdog work a flock of sheep, it's exactly what a change agent has to do. And in most literature, change agents find that they can't live with an organization that doesn't move with them, that they move on and they go somewhere else. And many change agents leave an organization before the change happens because they just get tired. So change agents have to learn how not to get burned out, and how do you reward yourself for certain things that happen. So with that, we can sort of talk about how some of this progressed with trying to get people to be involved with Interloop. Most of the time when we went to start talking about the Interloop, that's either with Grove Place or with Lewis Street, and we dealt with the Collective Action Project. And most of them, it was denial. Well, it's not going to happen. Never will happen. That Interloop, they've been telling about that for years. And we said, no, this is upon us. There's a feasibility study out there. And unless we get involved, you're going to have the same thing that you've had done to you instead of with you. So how are we going to make a difference? And that's been 3 years of work. Quite frankly, it's constant work. And as June Grant said, you have to learn how to listen to do it. It's not normal community organizing because you're dealing with something different in people's lives. It's a huge project. And how are you going to activate a voice that says, no one wants to listen to me? So especially when you look like me and you look like Sean. So in either neighborhood's difference, you have to realize what you look like when you go into that neighborhood. So Sean has been doing this for years. He goes across all sorts of blocks. And he tells me he started out when he was a kid hanging out on the street, and he looked at, or even later in his life, he said, look, these kids are just looking at, signs for cigarettes and EBT and all of that type of thing. Why don't I change this? And what he did is he painted the wall and he put words, love, things like that had come out of it. And that really does cause people to start talking about it and get involved. And that's what art does. I think it's Springfield Project or the Springbrook Project talks about always bring in an artist because they have a different concept of how you can actually engage people. So I watched Sean. He's a master of people. If you ever walk down the street with Sean, you find everybody knows him. Hey, bro. And you can't have a real conversation with him because he's constantly being stopped. He's a celebrity of, how are you? And he's got time for everybody. So I think with going back to Hinge, we said, okay, how are we going to do this? And what we originally started, we started conversations with banks, asking them, how could we get involved to talk about land use here? And that we heard that the city had about $1 million coming in for a feasibility study, and we wanted $25,000 of that. And we wanted to leverage it to $250,000 at least in order to hire our own consultants. Maybe it was a pie in the sky dream. And what we wanted to do was develop a land use process that would be just for this community and could really zone in on how the land could be used. Well, to be truthful, people just thought, well, who the heck are you people? And why are you doing it? And we could get the money. We really believed in it, but everybody said, if the city gives you money, we'll do it. And we couldn't get the money from the city. So we said, okay. And the city, we talked with Mayor Warren, and we said, well, how can we be involved if we don't want you involved with land use? Okay, so she said, do community organizing, talk with the neighbors, get that. So that's where we became really focused on how do we get the neighborhoods involved. Most of the time when we went out, people said, well, it'll never happen, or they can't take our inner loop away. So when we went to Grove Place, we said, well, they said, no, we don't want it because when we said, why don't you want it filled in? Because how are we going to get to the airport? So Sean and I thought that was real code about, well, we really, really don't want to have these neighborhoods coming together. And that was our whole concept of how are you going to connect the neighborhoods? Because we do have more alike than we don't. And so then we went to the collective action project and we said, it's going to be filled in. What? Are you kidding me? How are we going to get to Henrietta? So we said, wow, it's the same. So we said, okay, we have something to work on now. And now we can sort of talk about that. So we did, and it took, we found to our surprise that people weren't there with open arms waiting for us to make a difference. Obviously, we had to start really listening more and understand. So eventually we decided, well, we would have to go to the neighbors closest to the moat and talk to people there. So we targeted the school. We talked to New Bethel Church. We've talked to business people. We've talked to Grove Place. We've talked to Collective Action Project. And then we went to Lewis Street. And Lewis Street really wasn't organized at all. And it was very hard to have a conversation with anybody. So we went to the mural. We did a mural, and we went to what we know, Sean's Murals. And he donated the design of this. We went to the YMCA at that point in time. They had daycare. And they said, sure, this would be a good thing. You can come and talk to the parents. And also we'll see what we can put on the mural. So we went there and we said, the community place that owns the business said, yes, you can do it. So the community came out as we were trying to say, well, what do you want on this design? And they said, we don't want it. I said, well, why? And they said, well, because it's going to get marked up. There's going to be graffiti in it, and you're not designing it right. And it's just a horrible thing to do to us. And then we talked to other people, and they said, no, do it. So we then found out that there was an alumni group of the community center of the Lewis Street Center. And they became involved and interested in that we were doing this project. And so then it had a little bit more credibility. But most of the people who were not organized, but more interested, still came through. And even the day before we were to draw the mural and do the mural, they went to the Y and say, we're going to shut you down. And it was and we said, well, why? Why are you wanting to shut us down? And the morning I arrived, Sean was getting paint at the store and they had a computer glitch. So there I was by myself. Yeah, the Karen has to explain to people, why are you going to do this? And it became, well, I said, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I have to tell you that Sean is known in the community, and Sean has worked everywhere in every place you could imagine, and it's never been tagged because there's respect for Sean. And this time, we really want you to trust us and get the people come out and paint with us. And then there were neighbors who came out, they painted with us. And the neighbors who were objecting said, okay, well, why you have to get the alumni involved, which we did. So it became a two-part project. One was painting the mural. We had the Y supplied a lot of their interns from all over the city. We had neighborhood people. We had people from different organizations that all of a sudden came. We had board members who were there, and we had water and food, and it was fun. It was really fun. And we invited interns and residents from the medical school because they wanted to be able to understand the communities that they were treating. So they came over and talked about it. We had people who did blood pressure. So people came out to get their blood pressure checked for free. That's a good one to remember to do because people need that. And just other things like that. So it was a very successful day. And then about 3 weeks later, we had a time where Sean said we have to have a memorial to the people who were here. And we said, well, what's that all about? And basically, it was to really engage with the alumni, and the alumni from Lewis Street were all successful people around town. And they were very wanting to be invited to be re-engaged into the neighborhood. And we still need to continue to do that better, but that's part of why we're working with the Landmark Society now to sort of get the history involved and put that down and recognize that as a real plus for the neighborhood. And June brings that in to go back and how do you find ways to go do history and bring history there and recognize the history of the area and how successful it was, what it looked like then. And then, as you say, walk into the future from things from your past that are positive, and not to remember what always the bad stuff, but what fun it was. So now we have a group that is engaged, and the Y then works on certain things. They have a Lewis Street committee, and this group, we talked with them and they said, well, you need to tell them. And we said, no, it's time for you to tell them, and we'll help you tell them what you want to do, but let's listen and get this down. And they said, well, we need to have a presentation. We want the mayor there. We want city council member there. We want Bergman there. We want everybody. So we said, okay, we'll make this happen. So we invited them. They sent a letter to everybody and said, we're going to have a presentation in Zoom. You're invited, and we're going to present to you. And they did. And we helped them with their PowerPoint. And that's when it was a pivotal time for this whole thing. Same thing happened with the School 58. We had a hard time getting into School 58 to be trusted. We found a couple of teachers, and then the school year happened. And we then had to re-engage with people the following year. And they're two young teachers named by James Flagler and Sarah Huntone, and they were really marvelous about bringing kids together. And we worked through the pandemic, developing their presentation to the city as well. And the supervisor of schools came, and they were very excited to hear how their students were really talking about this. The school was interesting because the school is a magnet school. So the school, they were very involved, and they wanted green space, and what would they do with the green space and how they needed it. So I think it's quite interesting to say that the students had to be, we say, okay, this is great. We got it all down. Now we asked, what would you do with the community? How are you going to get involved with the community? Because the community is saying, you never are there. And they will say, well, there are reasons for that. We don't feel safe. And so there was a lot of discussion about that, of things they would like to see in the community so that they would join in with the community. If you talk to the neighbors will say, that school isn't our school. When they took away School 14 and they put in School 58. School 14 was a community school and was involved with the community. School 58 is not necessarily involved with the community. But School 58 will tell you that on the east side, when they put in the interloop on the east, they were never consulted. They never knew what was happening. So that was what our whole mission was, to make sure that people did know. And we reached out with as many people as possible to do that. And now we're engaged in keeping it going and making sure that people are reviewing the different concepts. And we realize that there are a lot of things that we need to be educated on. And that is, and also we know that if you're alone, people can fragment you. If you find other people to work with and bring people together, which I think June sort of implies in many cases, that those coalitions and alliances serve to strengthen your movement and make sure that you really have a bigger voice. So with the Hinge, what we've really reached out now, and the business people, and we do a better job about now that we know more about how to do some of these things, we know where we can ask people to do things for us. So, but we don't know how to do them. So we've reached out to the Design Center and to the Landmark Society to talk about zoning. We didn't want to charrette because we didn't think that people were really ready for that. And we wanted, and to really design, get them involved with the streets first. Now, the second thing is, how do you start getting involved in what zoning can do for you? Because we're really worried about the ZAP process, the zoning alignment project, which is going to determine what's there. Right now, all the new space that would be created by infill would be city center or downtown mixed use. You can correct me because I can't remember these, a DMU. And that's pretty scary because that's where anything goes. And if you listen to the community says, we want you to take us back to the grid. We want to have our houses that you took away from us. We want to have the small businesses that are here. We want North Street to be our business center. We want to have that type of thing. And if you're going to build large projects, that's not going to work for us. So it's really about, the zoning is really important. So we know that we need to have education that's for all the citizens on east side, on the south side in Grove Place, and on the north side in Lewis Street. Why? Because zoning is a foreign language. It's a foreign, the architecture is a foreign language, and you have to learn how to use that language to help you understand, oh, that's what that means. Oh, I see how that's going to work, or what that can do to me, or how it can work for me or against me, and understanding. And how do we make a difference? How do we get enforcement on things like that? So we asked people to join us. We went to the Design Center and said, do you think you could do like workshops? That's what we think we want. We don't know. We sort of said, come and help us have this conversation. And we went to the Landmark Society saying, everybody's there, the residents are saying they want to have their history documented. They want to have us understand how important that is. Sounds like June Grant's lectures. And how do we do this? And so we thought, well, we'll have to ask the Landmark if they would be interested in doing it. And lo and behold, they said yes. And we are starting on this. So we said, what we'll do is we'll go out and do some fundraising so we can pay you to do this, and find out how we can do this. And then the big thing, they call it, and June talks about these events. What she talks about is sort of making things so you can think about this walk into the future, what it might look like. Sean's his dream has been to have a huge event on the bridge, the Scioto Street Bridge. And we now have money, we believe, to do that and create this event. Now, the event's not easy to do because you have to shut down, you have to pay for police, you have to get permission, you have to get people involved, etc. So we started with the school. School 58 wants to do a project there and help beautification types of things. So that's good service projects for them. The neighborhoods are going to be a little harder. We're going to have to really work hard on how do you do this, coming together to do this. So it'll be building benches, painting. The benches then would be distributed up Scioto Street. So it's starting to think about looking what the future should look like. So that we said, well, why, if you walk around Grove Place, you'll see art work on buildings, you'll see their benches. And that was something that the organization asked for donations, and they then purchased some of these things. So we have to find some people who can do some artwork benches as well, that we need to share this with another neighborhood. Once it's sort of like in the world of quality where I came from, is that you can't just do it in one place. It has to be repeatable. So if you can repeat these things, then you have this iterative process that makes things work. So yesterday, so we've had to learn how to be fundraisers. And that's what June says she does. That's what we do. We do fundraising. Now, mostly, how can we do this is because I'm retired. I have a background of a business. I have that type of thing. So I can use those skills that I have. And Sean can use his ability of communication with people, of his artists, and how that works as communication, and how we can then sort of break barriers through art. So that's quickly. And yesterday was a big, heady experience, and I can talk about that if anybody's interested in it. So if you have any questions.
I'm going to jump in because there's so many points that you brought up that are really important. One, art is a communication tool. You know, I know that people can understand things through pictures or through words differently than they do if they have to read a text. So thankfully, you have someone in the community who is a fantastic artist and a wonderful community advocate who also brings with him that trust. So he is a tremendous asset to your organization and, of course, to our community. What you were talking about a little bit is that kind of tactical urbanism that we've been struggling to find a way to do it well here in Rochester, because the powers that be, the people that are responsible for safety and control, have a real hard time dealing with the idea that we can do something that goes against the rules. And one of the things that I think we as an organization can do is maybe come up with a tactical urbanism playbook that might state the reasons why tactical urbanism is important as an experiment, and then why it is, as a temporary measure, should be beneficial for learning, so that we can really start to make the case with the city agencies that need to be approving the street closures and all these other things, with the understanding that they know that it's just going to be something that happens for a given period of time, and that there's tremendous value in doing those things.
I agree. Part of it, though, is making friends in the government. And that's hard sometimes. It's like, do I change my values by doing that? And it's not. I think that was probably one of the biggest learnings in the corporate world, and maybe Richard can talk a little bit about that. But part of getting things done is to bring people to the table that don't necessarily agree on anything, and that are not friends, and trying to get things, find commonalities to do that, and to make friends in places that you don't think are necessarily that way. One thing that we did, a lot of this is like, we made some really, we just said, well, we're going to try this. So the sanitation stations were not for necessarily our Grove Place and Lewis Street. It wasn't involved in our target market necessarily, but we put one on Main Street, and but what we wanted was, how could we get involved in the time of COVID and bring people together to make a difference? And Sean said the trains, the bus station is a place where people hang out. They need help, like, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have hand sanitizing liquid, which was hard to get at a place where you could get on a bus, get off the bus, wash your hands, feel better about it. And how could we do this? So it was really, it was different. It was a statement, and it was sort of like what you're trying to do. And we made a lot of friends that way. We had RTS, we had Iron Smoke Whiskey. That was a friend of my son's. You know, you have to use everybody you know doing these things. Friend of a son, friend of a friend, whatever. And you have to, and then their distributor, and they were really great. We talked to a lot of people. RTS said, sure, this would be great to have. And then other people with Sean's, yeah, that's great. And he talks about these projects. Yeah, we'd like to be involved with that, et cetera. Mercantile in front of them. We had one in other places. And out from that came a lot of, oh, who are these people? They're not doing anything. We didn't harm anybody. In fact, we gave out lots of the sanitation, hand sanitizer that Iron Smoke Whiskey and Rochester Distribution, they gave to us to do it. And it was really lots of fun to see it going out. And people were saying, you're giving this to us? And so I think that's part of that. So then I think that when we ask for something now, it's not a no immediately. It's, okay, now what do you want? And they'll listen to us a little bit more. They might still say no, but that's creating that friendship that you have to do. That's what I'm trying to get around. And it's not, some people used to say, well, aren't you manipulating people? And no, I don't think it's manipulation. It's really about what you're trying to do is going to the basic good, the good of people and the good of Rochester. And if you know Sean, he loves Rochester. I like to say that our love is for Rochester. We came here from another place. We lived here for many years and we retired here because we felt, where could we do the best in our retirement life? And this is what we needed to do. So yeah, we're those old people that are contrary and running around, but we can help from what we do know and donate back to the community that way. So love of Rochester means that if you have that upmost in your whole thing, your love may be a little bit different each way that you interpret that. But when you come together, that's your driving force. And how do we change to make Rochester even a lovelier place? So
yeah. I had remembered that as an initial project, and I was going to say, you started this, this idea was hatched. You were very forward thinking, understanding that the Interloop project was going to be an eventual consideration after Interloop East was completed. And you have been boots on the ground for, as you say, 3 years now. So you have built your reputation and trust in the community. Going back to June's presentation, I think one of the things, there were so many things that I got out of her presentation for our organization. And the first and foremost thing was this whole notion of we are a resource provider, not necessarily the director or the leader of the project. And I think inherently Hinged attempts to do this. We do this, but we've never made it a statement about it. We've never put it front and center to say, this is how we operate. And I think we should, because so many times we have knowledge about strategies, and these are the kinds of things that we need to educate the community about. But we still need to let the community choose for themselves whether they want to implement those strategies or not. And a great example is with Dr. Destiny Thomas's presentation a few months ago or last month, the whole way that the community that she was working in envisioned bike lanes completely differently than we as engineers and architects propose them to be. And yet this is what her community wanted, and this is how the community operated. And it's very successful for them because it was a custom solution for them. So we know a lot about strategies and trends, but we have to be able to share those with people and then let them decide, is this something that I want to do or not?
Yeah. Before we started this, we were talking about one-way street. And in Lewis, what they say is, we want one-way streets. If you're going to tell us that Lyndhurst is not going to become two-way streets, we're going to fight you to the death. And I said, oh, that's very interesting, because in, like a lot of people are saying, well, we need two-way streets. If you listen to Mr. Speck, isn't that Richard Speck or something? Doesn't he talk about two-way streets all the time? I don't know. Anyway, two-way streets are like, so Maria knows this stuff, like, why do you have two-way streets? And, we can carry on this conversation with two-way streets are slow down traffic and etc. What people in the neighborhood are saying, look, people don't shovel their driveway or their walkway, and the city it's not the best shape of all of our sidewalks. So we walk in the street. If you watch anywhere in this city, in the wintertime, people walk in the streets. People have their wheelchairs in the streets because you can't walk on the sidewalk. So they said one-way streets are better for us because in the wintertime, we only have to watch one way. And it's safer for us to walk on the streets. And one way is better for us. So, well, that's very interesting. So when they presented that to, like, we would like some one-way streets, the city tried, or Bergman actually tried to do some two-way streets in their concepts, but I'm not sure that they work, but because they look more like, as one woman put it, as Nancy Mancusa said, well, that looks like I-81, not our neighborhood. So I think it's kind of how you think about that.
Yeah, another point you made is, the community, even though they may not have the expertise about particular strategies and design, they are experts in their neighborhoods. They know what works, they know what doesn't work. But also I made in one of my presentations in the past, I showed some information about streetscapes. And I said, I made a statement regarding design, that we're all designers. And what design is, the definition of design is a thoughtful planning process. So we inherently can decipher good design from poor design, regardless of our expertise. There are spaces that people don't go through. And if you look at those spaces, they tend to be very poorly designed. Again, if we're able to share the tools and strategies, the people will recognize what works, what doesn't work, what they feel would be implementable in their neighborhood to have success and achieve their goals. Understanding the history of a place is obviously something we're well aware of. We can't move forward if we don't know exactly what was there before, and if we don't acknowledge what was there before. And your point regarding the community starting to come together and realizing that if this inner loop is going to be filled in, that land was theirs. It was taken from their neighborhood and they want it back. And this whole juxtaposition between we want to support a low density or low rise development, let's say. It doesn't have to be low density, but tie into the existing fabric of the neighborhood, similar to what was there before, versus the goals of oftentimes developers who have to maximize the opportunity, right? And so almost always a developer is going to propose some very dense, very tall development. So how do we resolve that? And one of the opportunities that exists in the inner loop is that it's been divided into certain sections, 4 different sections, ranging from industrial use, commercial use, all the way to residential. So we do support, Suzanne, the idea that there be some distinguished zoning that will say high density or tall buildings are better here and not so much there. So we would certainly voice that opinion to the ZAP. So many things from June's presentation that resonated with me, but this statement that she made, walk into the future. And that's one of the things that I really urge people to consider as we look at the inner loop. The solutions that were proposed by the consultants all are still very car-centric solutions. And they really follow kind of just doing the same thing we've always had, just in a different way. And the notion of reinvigorating our streets and making the community whole again really means that we have to go to a pedestrian-friendly focus. To people are what activates streets. People playing in the streets, kids playing in the park. Those are what make places interesting. I never drove by a huge parking lot full of cars and said, honey, stop the car. I want to see what's going on, right? You go by park and you see a bunch of people at a concert and you're like, yo, you know, this is it. I'm going to change my plans and I'm going to take this detour. So the economic value of using a pedestrian-friendly focus is tremendous. If we're really talking about healing the community, we really want to bring economic value back into the city and the community. We have to do it so that people can navigate the spaces. And that certainly means that we have to limit the car traffic. We have to change that expectations of cars being able to go 50 and 60 miles an hour through our neighborhoods. Go ahead.
I agree with you, but we realized in this conversation yesterday and some conversations that we have, I think maybe I could say probably avoided having. But one of the first things that we did was go to RTS and ask them what they had, what were their objections or what could they do with the inner loop being filled in. And they said, well, we need to have high speed or high area to get from east side to west side. And we said, why? And they said, well, we need to move our buses from their empty buses from the east side to the west so that they could pick up. That's where they start and they pick up their
routes.
Thank you. Their routes and their clients to go on the bus. So their whole objection is that if they didn't have the inner loop, they would add 7 minutes to every bus that had to go through to the other side, and that's expensive. And so we said, well, what happens if you were going through the neighborhood, but you were a part of the neighborhood and you could actually go pick up people in the neighborhood and provide an east-west kind of slower approach and actually have people going east and west. Well, it was like a lead balloon, but it was like, okay, we started this conversation so we can continue having this conversation. But what we haven't done well, and Hinge has to do is really, and we talked about this last night, is engage with the people who are saying, well, what are you going to do for us? How are you going to do this? And those are people like who own businesses, who have stayed in the neighborhood, who still contribute to the neighborhood, and who are employees of people in the neighborhood. That would be Genesee Brewery, big, that's big voice. That would be B&L. It would be other people who are still in the neighborhood, and janitorial supply. They say, how are our customers going to get to us? And also, how do I get my trucks out onto 490? So if you're going to take the 490 connection away, how do you do this? And they are part of the neighborhood. So we can't ignore them. We have to find a solution that will work for them, because if they can't do this, they can say, well, we can leave the neighborhood, and they could, and we don't want them to. We want them to stay there and be a part of the neighborhood and engage bringing more businesses into the neighborhood. So it has to be in change and in life, everything is a balance.
Absolutely. Christina, I know you wanted to make a comment.
Sorry.
Jump on in.
Sure, yeah, if I may. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm a former volunteer at the Design Center. I currently live in Calgary, Canada, so I'm a couple time zones away. But it's great to be here. Maria, you mentioned one thing that I'd like to relate back to a point that struck me from June's lecture. You were talking about streets being more pedestrian focused, being more visible in terms of, what's going on sort of a human scale, right? Driving by and you see a concert nearby and you want to pull over, you want to join in. June mentioned how when she does community engagement, she takes up space. on the street, right? She's outside. And that allows people who didn't even know about this event, right, to simply happen upon it, right? And to join in if they'd like. I really like that concept. I know there are probably complications with that, but the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is, okay, she's in Oakland, pretty mild climate, right? She can probably have these outdoor type engagement activities pretty often. But in Rochester and in Calgary, where I live now, both of us have snowy, cold, long winters. So is there a way that we can do that to have these sort of outdoor, visible community engagement type events in our respective cities?
We have to take advantage of the good weather that when we have it, right? So we have organizations like Reconnect Rochester that's doing the Complete Streets Makeover, which is a large annual event now. This whole idea of this tactical urbanism, that's kind of why I brought it up. But I love the idea that June said, that, and I believe we should have that program here where you adopt a space. And it'd be interesting, Suzanne, to look at in the community, where are those abandoned places, forgotten places that we might be able to adopt to create these opportunities for an event, a presence that starts to make others that are people that are coming through the neighborhood more aware. I think that's a great point, Christina. And you're beginning to have a Canadian accent.
Am I? Uh-oh. It rubs off on me for sure.
Hey.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on time. I'd love for all of you other folks that are on here, if you'd like to jump in and share a comment or an insight from the presentation last week, or if you have anything to talk about regarding anything that's happening in the city now. It's an intimate group, and I'd love to have you jump in. Richard, you've posted a lot of great things. Do you want to share some of them personally?
Yeah, I'm part of the activist movement in town, and I know, like Suzanne, occasionally we cry on each other's shoulders with discouragement, but then somehow, like weebles, we wobble, but then we get right back up. And I think that capacity, it's a very entrepreneurial trait as well. You see it among, and I would categorize the work Suzanne and Sean is doing as social entrepreneurship. But I must say, again, hope springs eternal. And after the events of the past week, I just feel like the brush has been removed and the blossoms can bloom. And that the mandate, I think the legislators, both the county, the city council, and the mayor-elect, potentially, he's not technically elect, have received a mandate that the old way of doing it, top-down, a degree of opacity, is not what the community wants. And this openness and receptivity. And just informally, I know within City Hall, some of the very talented, capable people feel a sense of relief. I don't want to identify individuals because there is a lot of capacity that I believe has gone unused over the last few years. But it is a private-public initiative. It's the community input. And June Grant made that very explicit. And I remember that one project around this, I think it's the storm sewers or the channels at, in Oakland, and how she described a different sort of mentality among the people who had the engineering degrees and the city planners, and they were willing to modify their strictures and be open to change and new ideas. Because ultimately, if you're in your 50s or perhaps even in your 60s and you're an engineer, you grew up around the car. You grew up as a product of the car culture. And our friends in their 20s and 30s, the ones who are repopulating the city, they don't want the car. It's expensive. It's a burden. It gets in the way of the quality of life they enjoy, which is proximity to their work, to coffee shops, whatever, their friends. So, just sort of the Wayne Gretzky, go to where the puck is going. We're going to be living with the results of this project for decades. We had to endure 60 years of the outcome of the urban renewal and the inner loop. So anyway, it's refreshing. And I'm also, with Rock Grove, people have heard me state our mission is to empower the new generation, and it's not all young. So Suzanne is a young spirit, and it's amazing to see her out there yesterday in 92-degree weather, standing upright like everyone else, hearing our senators
Yeah, that was,
basically claim. They didn't tell us that we won, but they were there to give us a little pep talk, I think.
but yeah, and the opportunity to be there so that you could shake their hand, look in their eye, and say, we want to continue this discussion. That's probably the largest value that Sean and I thought about, that we came back with. And so we'd have to seize the moment and get them on a discussion to talk about this. So we'll probably be calling on those of you here who would engage with us and help us do that. And one of the things that yesterday showed, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, you can yell at me. Yesterday was the community. I tried to make sure that the communities that we were working with were represented there. And they came, and I think to a certain extent they were sharing, why weren't we invited to be behind the senator? And we have to go back and say, look, we were surprised to be invited. Quite frankly, we got a call saying we'd like you there. So you appear, of course, because you have an opportunity to talk to somebody. And now we have to say, well, here we just were there as a resource. And we use the moment to make sure it comes back to you. And we hope to say, okay, here is the representative from Gillibrand, and here's the representative from Schumer. They're coming to you to talk to you. That is what we do. It won't be that, and that's how that's going to happen. And that's what we're going to hopefully have some conversations with and say, okay, here they are. And we're going to talk about this. They're going to have to hear what you have to say. And they're ready to say it. They love their community. And I love my community. And so we really we have that love together. And I would say to June said this very well. She said, you have to listen to the community. And it's not about changing the community, it's enhancing the community. I think she used better words than what I'm using. But the other day, someone asked me to walk through Lewis Street with her, and she had never walked in the neighborhood. And we find a lot of that. Sean and I joined this racial equity community. It's a part of the community advisory committee. And no one, at least the two of us, were the only people who had ever been in the neighborhood that they're talking about. So, which was surprising. So when we walked people, and that was surprising to Sean too. So when I took this person through, I was trying to listen to how she talked about the community she was walking through. And so she would say, for certain positive things, like there was a lot of graduation signs in the front of houses. There was, some, places that really looked great, some that didn't look good. And we have the same thing in Grove Place. Certain places look great, some certain like awful. And then we got to there was a memorial. Now, memorials are different, something I never was really exposed to, but in this place on Weld Street, it's Ontario Street. There is a place where people come together. There are bottles there. And this person said, oh, look at these bottles staying here. Why don't they just pick them up and put them in the garbage can? I said, well, it's a memorial to a man who was shot here. And this happened 5 years ago, but people still come every night or every other night, and they get together and they talk. It's part of the community. Sort of like when June showed us the drummers. The drummers, that's how they're using the neighborhood. And that is how this community is using the neighborhood. Now, there's conflict in the neighborhood because there are a lot of people who don't come out of their doors because of that, the people who are hanging around at that point. But they're all part of the neighborhood. And if we can activate them and get them involved, we will be so much richer. And so I think that is really learning how to appreciate the culture of the neighborhood, not wanting to change it, but to appreciate it and use the history to further engage in how that works to their future. And the same thing for Grove Place.
Absolutely. Well, we've run out of time, and certainly I'm so grateful to all of you that joined us today. But this is a really important project nationally, so please pay attention. Please participate in whatever way that you can.
Yes, and as the senators say, contact all the other senators to pass this bill.
Yeah, and we may be engaged in sharing some support letters that can be adapted to reflect more authentic language from your perspective. But we encourage you to please write your senators, write the decision makers, so that we can make sure that this project is something that we can be really proud of in 30 or 40 years, as opposed to something that we'll wish we had done differently. So with that, I thank you all, especially Suzanne, for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you. I always obviously talk too much. I want to thank you for doing what you do. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, all of us working together, including Richard with Rock Growth, everybody has their space, and working together, we can really make a big difference. So let's do that more intentionally. I just want to invite you all to be engaged in your community and look at people or projects that are making a difference. We are having our annual Reshaping Rochester Awards ceremony in November. The nominations open in July. It's a really simple nominating process, but we really want you to walk your neighborhoods and notice what's making a difference in your community. And we'd like to recognize those people. And with that, please share any insights you have, either directly to myself or to Monica, or please fill out our survey. We do review the surveys, and it does help us implement some of the feedback that you give us. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. We're looking forward to another fantastic series next year.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Suzanne.
Nice to see you, Christina.
Nice to see everyone too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.